So now let's look at the interest rate and investment relationship. So keeping in mind investment now, what we're talking about is the purchase of capital goods. So think of expanding your business. So suppose that you own a waffle cart in business as well. And so you're thinking on building another waffle cart. So what you're going to want to know is what is your expected rate of return on that next waffle cart. So you're going to look at what's it cost to produce and then compare that to what revenue you can get, and so you can get your expected rate of return, which is denoted by R. And then the other thing you're going to be interested in is what is the real interest rate. So keeping in mind that the real interest rate is the nominal interest rate adjusted for inflation, and so that's denoted by I. So the reason you're interested in this is because if you're going to take a loan out in order to build your cart, you're going to want to make sure that the interest you pay on your loan is less than the interest that you're going to earn on the money. Or perhaps, let's say you've got lots of money, is if you could make more money in your bank account than you could on building the second waffle cart, then you probably wouldn't do it. So what we find out is if your expected rate of return then is greater than the interest rate, this means that you will go ahead and you will invest, or in other words, you will buy that waffle cart. And so keeping in mind when we're talking about investment is that we're talking about this is I little g as denoted. Now, so what this tells us, or what this can show, is what we'd call an investment demand curve. An investment demand curve tells us how much investment will occur at any given rate of interest. So let's say the real interest rate is quite high. So it's at I subscript 1. And so we could go over and we'd be on a point A on our investment demand curve. And so what we'd see then is that the amount we'd invest is relatively small. So we'd end up with a gross investment of IG subscript 1. And again, this makes sense because if interest rates are high, that means if you need to take a loan out to buy your capital, so you need to take a loan out to go buy your second waffle cart, if the interest rate's high, you're probably not going to take that loan out because you'd have to have a really high return in order to pay that money back and have a profit. But now if interest rates drop, say perhaps to I2, what we find is if we go look at our investment demand curve, is that at a lower interest rate, the gross investment will be a lot higher. Or in other words, if the loan is cheap for you to borrow the money to build your waffle cart, you'll probably do that. So what happens is we move from a point A to point B. So again, interest rates drop from I1 to I2, causes the amount of investment in economy to increase from IG to IG2. So we've got that negative relationship between the real interest rate and the amount of investment in terms. Now, we know if the interest rate changes, that can cause the amount of investment in economy to change. Now, there's some other things that can shift the demand curve. So these are things other than interest rate. So if we say that something happens that increases an investment demand curve to a point like D1, this shows an increase in investment demand. So it's a shifting to the right. And so what we find then is that higher level of demand is we go from a point like IG little a to IG little b. And so we've had an increase in the amount of investment in the economy due to something other than interest rates changing. Now, there's other things in the economy that could also force the investment demand curve to shift left. So we'd move to an ID2. And again, so this is what we'd call a decrease in investment demanded. And again, what it would do here if interest rates stay the same is that we'd end up on a point like C. And so what we'd have is we'd end up at IGC. So there's 5 non-interest rate determinants of investment demand curve. And so these are the things other than interest that can influence the amount demanded in an economy. In other words, that can shift the investment demand curve to the right or to the left. So the first one is capital costs. So what we're talking about here is the actual acquisition costs and the maintenance cost and the operating cost. So if the cost to have the capital increases, then this is going to decrease the investment demand curve, or in other words, shift it to the left. Now, the second non-interest determinant of demand is business taxes. So business taxes are basically a form of cost. So same thing happens. If these go up, then this is going to cause the investment demand curve to shift left, and as shown over here will cause the amount of gross investment in the economy to decline. Now the third one is technology. So generally when there's a technology change, it's an improvement in productivity. So if this happens, then there's an incentive for firms to go invest in new technology because they'll be able to get more out of their inputs, and so they're able to earn more money, and so this would cause an increase in investment demanded. So think of a new robot coming out. And if it helps you make more money, then odds are is that you'll get that new robot and put it into your production line. Now the fourth one is, we call it the stock of capital. So think of this as excess supply. So if you have idle capital, meaning it's just sitting and not being used, so this increases for some reason, then typically what that means is that there's no incentive for you to get new capital, so that will shift the investment demand curve to the left. And then the last one, and this is probably the most powerful one, is expectations. So again, this is expectations of future profits, basically. So if we believe that the business is going to pick up, and so there's going to be a good future, then odds are that will cause us to increase our gross investment or increase the investment demand curve for an economy. So unfortunately, today we're not seeing much investment, and it's because the expectations are that the economy is not going to pick up. And so if this expectations are decreasing, then the investment demand curve is decreasing and shifting to the left.